everything starts with a problem. And then I develop a problem-solving strategy. And how I do that, I'm not exactly sure, just like I don't understand how a caterpillar becomes a butterfly during metamorphosis.
Okay.
The way my creative brain works, able to develop a problem-solving strategy, which then becomes a gift, which then becomes a skill, and a gift without a skill is not tangible.
The Intelligence Forge podcast is sponsored by Permasize AI Forge. The Intelligence Forge podcast is sponsored by Permasize AI Forge. At Permasize AI Forge, we know you're ambitious. But are manual tasks like admin, lead generation, nurturing, and onboarding holding you back from truly scaling your business? Imagine saving dozens of hours every week, freeing you to deepen client relationships and execute high-impact strategy. Our clients aren't just imagining it. They're saving countless hours per week and doubling their revenue within months. We custom-build AI automation systems that eliminate the grind. From effortless lead generation and nurturing to seamless onboarding, we give you back the most valuable resource, your time, so you can focus on building those vital human connections and driving strategic growth. Stop letting repetitive tasks limit your potential. It's time to build a business that works for you, not the other way around. Ready to unlock your true scaling power? Visit PermasizeAIForge.com and book your free AI audit call today to discover how you can save time and double your revenue. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the Intelligence Forge YouTube channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new episode.
Turning challenges into competitive advantage. How dyslexia, thinking, and AI are revolutionizing quality management and business consulting. Welcome to the Intelligence Forge. Today, we have a true fascinating guest whose journey proves that what society labels as limitations can actually be extraordinarily gifts. Tim Nelson, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Emmanuel.
All right. You are the founder of Creative Logic LLC,
Yes.
and you have a very incredible background from serving as a U.S. Capitol Page to coaching engineers on the fighter jet program at Lockheed Martin. And now you are revolutionizing how we think about dyslexia as a gift, combining AI with quality management. I want you to start by introducing yourself, your company,
Yeah.
Creative Logic LLC, in your own word. Tell our listener what you do and what makes your approach unique.
Well, I learned problem solving first and worked on some of the toughest problems in the world. Some were called unsolvable, and this was it. Companies like Delphi was the largest automotive component supplier in the world with the largest customer base in the world. And I worked directly with the CEO and his presidents that were specific to the different product lines. And I met the developer of a process called RedX, and that was 1980, and he's known as the guru. He's dead now, but the guru with regard to problem solving. He had quality experts like Joe Duran, who was quality management. And I'll get off track sometimes because of my dyslexia, but you have experts that I also learned from, and one was named Carl Bennett, and Carl knew Einstein, and their careers overlapped on the Manhattan Project, which created the atom bomb. And I learned from Carl, was his name, Carl Bennett, and Carl, very humble, and he was the logical part of Creative Logic. And I drew a picture that has ended up being a standard, and that picture, the way I would describe it, is David and Goliath. And if David had a sling but not a stone, the stone's necessary but not sufficient, and the sling is necessary but not sufficient. So it's only when you combine the sling and the stone that Goliath was killed. And that's where creative logic comes from. Dyslexics tend to be more creative, and others tend to be more logical. And me learning to bring them together is where my coaching expertise is. And moving from high volume parts to low volume parts to now behaviors. And I've been developing the behavioral material for 5 years now and haven't actually launched it. But I've got I've got tons of material from the standpoint of another book. I've got 12 patents. I've got Creative Logic's just me because Carl was the first mathematician hired for that a lot. And, he made the connection between me and Einstein. We were separated by one generation. And he wrote a book about his mathematical brain. And in the front of the book, he wrote, Tim, never let the statisticians keep you from solving a problem. So he recognized my skills, and these David and Goliath story was actually developed with parts, but it's an easy way for me to explain to you what's called a two-factor interaction, and the sling was one factor and the stone was another factor. I drew that picture, and Carl, 4 years later, developed the math, and he proved the math that was developed in 1933 was wrong. And Carl was granted a patent based on my picture, and then Carl has deceased as well, but I've had the opportunity to work with the best. Right. The best.
Thank you so much for summing that up very well. That's really fascinating. All right, we're going to dive into more, but I saw that Forbes recently approached you to become a Forbes Business Council member, specializing in coaching. Congratulations on that. All right, I want to ask you that because you have a patent that combines machine learning with new generation of standard work for quality improvement beyond the major LLMs like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, or Grok. What specific AI tools or technology are you currently using in your business operation or in your competitive?
Okay, so let's imagine 3 blocks, and this will be a slide. And 3 blocks are side by side with arrows going from left to right. And then below that are 3 other boxes, and they're going from left to right as well. And the first 3 boxes, sometimes I make it 4. The first 3 boxes have to do with the initiative that is being driven. And I'm always the coach. But as a coach with all the diversified projects and products that I work on, I can't be an expert on all that subject matter. So I produce the inputs, and then and that's a box that represents the inputs coming into a box. And in that box is, my coaching expertise comes into place because I'm telling people what I want the inputs to be. Okay. Then the next box is the subject matter expert. For example, they may be a subject matter expert in the terms of how to generate good seals on the Expert 35 so that they're not fuel leaks. I have to rely on their skills with that particular thing, and that we call them SMEs. Okay. And also within that box, I'm coaching, but I'm also developing leadership.
Right.
And my teams always consist of 3 members: an executive sponsor, a coach that's preferably not within the organization, because they're not going to have the broad wit that I as coach would have. They may know their product, but they don't know all the other products. And then you got the coach, and I recommend hiring the best coach there is. Everybody needs a coach. Look at athletes, they have a coach. And then we get into the third box. And the third box, I'm describing what outputs I want. And then let's say, for example, all of that, let's just say is for a technical project. Works with any initiative, but let's say it's a technical project. Obviously, a 3-team structure is not going to give you all the resources you need. So I use a rolling team approach where when we need outside help, like for measurement system or something of that nature, we'll roll that resource on the team. And then as soon as the project is their part of the job is done, we roll them off again because we don't solve problems with committees.
Okay, let me just interject. But in all these, do you have any specific technology that you're using to get some of this work done?
Well, I don't because, well, let me say it differently. Sometimes on products I do, especially during my early days of working projects, not coaching projects.
Okay.
And then I'm helping them define a problem and put it in the form of a project.
Right.
And a problem can consist of many projects. Let's say that we have problems with quality.
Okay.
And our aim is to be our customer's best supplier.
Right.
Then the projects would all be associated with being the customer's best supplier. And I had the opportunity to work with Delphi, and Delphi at the time had 171 plants. And then they had the largest, number of employees and definitely the largest customer base. I think they had 180,000 employees at the time.
Okay.
So I'll come back to it in a minute. Let's keep up with this box model.
Okay.
Because I explained the top, and in the top, I'm giving the input based on projects. At the top, I'm using a subject matter expert who may be with respect to SIL. And I'm not an expert with respect to SILs, but with regard to the strategies with respect to leaks, I've worked on many leak problems.
Wow.
Many. They're one of my favorite projects to work on. Well, I can solve them so fast.
Yeah.
Then with regard to that internal box, I am coaching them, but I'm not the expert on the technology. And then the outside, the last box is the outputs. So for example, let's now move to the next 3 boxes where we're not talking about leaks. We're talking about or machine learning or deep learning. And my knowledge of AI is at that level. And I get really frustrated when I see all these various AI models and nobody has standardized them in terms of what I call next gen standard work.
Okay.
And next gen standard work, I use that terminology because standard work was developed in 1933 by Toyota to make mechanics consistent with one another in developing a product. That's not what I'm doing. These 3 boxes at the top and the 3 boxes at the bottom are standard work, next gen standard work. And that material, the 3 boxes up top, the 3 boxes below it, are my patent that involves AI, and it combines AI with, in terms of machine learning with standardized work, next gen standardized work.
Right.
So, for example, the next 3 boxes, which I'm going to get into, I would use quantum and Tableau.
Okay.
But I would not be an expert on quantum and Tableau. So I'm once again giving the inputs I want. And with quantum, they may show up as bubbles, big bubbles. But I use Pareto charts.
Okay.
And the machine learning is like operators may use the same or different technologies, whether they're talking about a defect or scrap. And a defect can be repaired and scrap cannot. But it's the same project, let's say. And they would do all the work with, just like the expertise on leaks, they're the expertise on AI. So I get a lot of people thinking I do AI, just like I do SILs. I don't. I rely on the subject matter experts, but I'm telling them what I want in and what I want out. And generally, what I want in starts as big data, and then I reduce it to smaller data, which would fit within our problem scope that involves various projects. So with machine learning, I can define the biggest project, or my subject matter experts can define the biggest projects. And then with Tableau, they can put them in the form I want to be able to present to leadership or whoever else is involved.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. I also noticed that you are very active on LinkedIn and recently published your book, Colors Gifted, on Amazon. Congratulations on that. The question is, how are you currently approaching your social media content strategy? What's working well for you in terms of building your brand visibility? And there aspect of content creation or consistency that you find challenging?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about two things.
Right.
One is virtually every problem-solving strategy, if not all problem-solving strategies, consist of one process.
Okay.
You have Six Sigma, and even though Six Sigma people sometimes challenge me, I've worked at all the biggest Six Sigma companies in the world with Motorola, Allied Signal, Rolls-Royce, etc. When they couldn't solve the unsolvable, I've been brought in to coach. And then with regard to the thing I've developed recently that is part of the patent, with the 3 boxes, and the 3 boxes is a quality system, which I call Next Gen Quality Improvement System, because it's not a commodity. And a commodity is you can pick any one of the processes and achieve the same outcome. Some I would consider them better than others, but that doesn't matter right now. What matters is my system starts with defining a project. All of my standard work is generic, but all my standard work also has an acronym associated with it. And I'll go through one of the acronyms.
Okay.
And the first acronym is ALIGN, all in capital letters.
Okay.
A stands for aim. O stands for link metrics to the aim.
Okay.
The next letter with respect to align is intent. And a general that I went to training with that are very specialized is the top specialized company in at least the U.S. that top leaders get it. And just because I'm one person and force requires you to have 500,000 people, I coach companies a lot bigger than that, and that's what made me a coach. So the finishing the align, the general taught me that, Tim, if I can convey to my troops intent, if I get killed, they still know what the intent is, and they can still carry it out. But with the Russian army, if they lose the general, in disarray. But the G in align is goals, and then the N in align is need project. So, for example, we may use that AI model that we were talking about in terms of 3 boxes. We may use that we may want our intellectual property in terms of artificial intelligence. You've got your own. Yep. We might use that intellectual property, and maybe someday me and you'll pair up with regard to my skills and yours. But that intellectual, that process, and I'll describe the rest of it in generic terms, even though there's a acronym behind it. Yep. So first, you define the projects. After you define the projects, you've got to solve the project using a process. And then after you solve the process, you got to explain to everyone how it was solved. Yeah. And then after you explain how it was solved, you start to move on to other projects. And that's what I called exploit. And you exploit what you learned, and then you move on and you deploy. And this is where Neurodivergent comes into play. It starts as the left upper corner with a great big car. Then in the middle, there are 5 smaller cars. And at the very end, there are 50 smaller cars. Whenever I go into a business, I start with their biggest problem. And we put that 3-person team together. And then we solve it. And while we're solving that one problem, we go deep before we go wide, and we go slow before we go fast. And the executive, this is a model I developed in 1988, and it's still standard work globally. And it's dealing with this rolling team approach as well as the biggest problem. When I help them solve the biggest problem, like on the CEO problem that went on for 35 years.
Wow.
And I solved it. I shouldn't say I solved it because that's my ego coming in. We as a team solved it. But people often credit me because of the coach. But back to this car model, the biggest car on the left-hand side is the biggest problem. Then the 5 cars in the middle, they're just lined up vertically. With those 5 projects, they in the same division of Delphi, we develop next-gen standard work. And that is when the AI or the machine learning can enter into that world as well. But then when we get to the 50, I may have standard work that I can use with regard to 5 division, 10 projects each, or 10 divisions with 5 projects each. And, once we develop that standard work, everybody knows their roles and responsibilities. The thing that leadership's got to get good at doing is asking the right questions.
Right.
And going from one of these boxes to the next, with me as a coach, teaching them not only what goes on, what their role is in one box, but also the exit criteria.
Thank you so much.
I teach a serial process, and the experts know when to jump out of the serial process, but the leaders don't need to know that.
Yeah.
And, so once we get that standard work defined, both in terms of an AI component or machine learning component, which was introduced to me the first time maybe 5 years ago, did I start learning to coach that kind of stuff. And I learned it paralleled any initiative. And then let me jump to the next topic, if I may. I didn't want to ask if...
Yes, I will still ask. Now, thank you so much for summing that up. However, we normally do a magic wand question, which everyone gets to answer on the podcast. And now is the time for me to ask you the magic wand question. So if you had a magic wand today, and you could instantly improve one thing about Creative Logic's operation, what would that be and why?
It would be the subject that I was going into next, and that's transferable skills.
Okay.
And I look back, everything starts with a problem, and then I develop a problem-solving strategy. And how I do that, I'm not exactly sure, just like I don't understand how a caterpillar becomes a butterfly during metamorphosis.
Okay.
The way my creative brain works, I'm able to develop a problem-solving strategy, which then becomes a gift, which then becomes a skill, and a gift without a skill is not tangible. And all other dyslexic authors start with what they call innate gifts. And I don't start with innate gifts. I start with my weaknesses and when I failed. And then I started developing what I was good at and what I was not good at. But what I was good at is my 7 transferable skills, and I help others develop theirs. So the first skills being creative, there's 7 of them. The second skill is defining projects. The third is running programs. The fourth is improving people. The fifth is understanding your gifts. The next one is like David and Goliath, understanding interactions, and the last one's next gen standard work. So all of that falls within the previous model of defining projects, and then after you define the projects, you're improving them. Then after you improve them, you're coming back to how did you make the improvements, and then you're going from there to exploiting, and then you go to the deploy, which is like the cars. And if you say, what's my magic wand? It's my transferable skills that when I hadn't defined them, I failed miserably. And once I defined them, I became very successful on multiple initiatives, including training people. And I've got some medical conditions that I'm actually training the doctors on.
Wow.
Using the same process.
Fantastic.
Using my diseases.
Wow. You are
Really wanted an example of one of those. I can give you an example, but let you take the lead.
all right. You are actually really gifted, and we can also dive into that. But I want to ask you one important question that you mentioned in your profile, that Creative Logic pairs creative and logic people to gain synergy. What you called 1 + 1 = 3. Can you give us specific example on how this has worked
Exactly.
in practical
And it's
with
another
potential client?
It's another slide. So at the top, you've got two circles, and those circles are spread apart from one another at the top, and they're spread apart horizontally.
All right.
One of them is creative, and then the other circle is logic. And initially, you have the creative group that's less respected in industry because they see their dyslexic as a stigma, and they don't see it as a gift. So, you got to have a 3.0 grade point average to enter into a company like Lockheed. And that's ridiculous because it's an academic yardstick, and there's not a creative yardstick but there is when I start developing book material. That's called myopic, when both circles are apart. Then as both circles start moving together, that's called symbiotic.
All right.
And the circles start to overlap as people respect each other. And then at the bottom, you got one circle that's bigger than the other two.
Okay.
Well, you can think of the other two with regard to symbiotic. Think of the other two as the one plus the one.
Right.
And then at the very bottom, you got a much bigger circle that encompasses both, and that's when we're synergistic. And when we're synergistic is when the 1 + 1 = 3, and that's when Carl, who was the expert mathematician on the atom bomb and the first hired, and just a little bit more about Carl. He didn't like talking about the atom bomb, and you may know where they were dropped, but there was a third bomb that was not dropped. It was supposed to be dropped on Tokyo, and Einstein kept it from being dropped because he didn't want more children killed. Well, Carl's main challenge in life was when the Russians and the Americans decided that they needed a treaty with regard to atom bombs. And Eisenhower came straight to Carl and asked Carl to develop algorithms so that we would know where nuclear activity was happening or being developed with uranium and stuff of that nature. And we know where those hot spots are. And still those acronyms that Carl developed today, that we know that technology. and he was very proud of going from killing people to going to protecting people. And I work, of course, with Carl, as I mentioned before, and he recognized my creativity. But when Carl spoke to me about things, I didn't understand a thing he said. It's kind of like the AI.
Wow.
But I was able to draw a picture because I think in images, and this is how the book is constructed. I think in terms of images, and I think in terms of narratives, and the flow of the book and the table of contents comes last. And then I have other people read the book from front to back, which is table of contents, narrative, and then the images that fit within the narrative. And when I'm thinking from front to back and have someone thinking back to front, which is just generally me, but I work closely with the top F-35 pilot that demoed the jet for the first time at the Paris Air Show. His name's Billy Flynn, and he has 40 videos, YouTube videos, just like you. We became very close, and at Lockheed, they had fellows, and a fellow cannot be a leader cannot be a fellow. My fellowship, and we represented 1% of the engineering community. So mine was problem solving, Billy's was top flight pilot. And we came together, and when we came together, I developed the concept of ambidextrous thinking. Once you define standard work, whether it's a logical person that defines it start to finish, or whether it's a dyslexic person that defines it from the end to the start, it doesn't matter. You don't know who defined it, whether they were dyslexic or whether they were logical, but they can both follow the two processes. And it's just like being as good left-handed as right-handed, but we're thinking about how our mind works. Here we're thinking about in terms of how our mind works as being ambidextrous as well.
Okay, thank you so much. Where can our listener connect with you to learn more about Creative Logic LLC and to get their hands on your book, Call Us Gifted?
Okay. Up to now, when I taught the transferable skills and I taught the next gen quality improvement system, those are a different book. And that book is almost completed. And that book is called Next Gen Quality. So everything I was talking about with regard to transferable skills, some of that carries over into the other book. But don't think of the second book as a sequel. Think of it as describing what I described before. And the only reason I wrote the dyslexic book first is I have a passion for it. And I said I didn't think in terms of ego. So I took every award that I ever earned and took one of these big green trash cans and I put them all in the trash. And then it was so heavy that I had to inch the trash can across the yard to the curve where the garbage vehicle could pick it with it. Now, you'll see those things listed as accomplishments, but I threw all my accomplishments away.
Wow.
And, you come into the world with nothing, you leave the world with nothing. And Solomon, who was supposedly the smartest man on earth, said that. I got to thinking about it. Well, I come with nothing, I leave with nothing. In terms of the next generation or two, they're going to forget about Tim. And so you'll end up in like Ancestry.com and all your possessions will end up in Cracker Barrel. I got to thinking, well, what I want to do is leave the world a gift, like Edison's light bulb. And Edison's light bulb was a technology that changed the course of man.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I want to leave behind with the world is everybody in the world looking at dyslexics as gifted. And that is my main purpose in life.
Yeah.
And I demonstrated that purpose in life by throwing everything away that had to do with ego. And the only thing that remained was the gift I left behind. So I have several of those things that I want to leave behind. And most of the items, I believe in God. And I also have friends that are atheists. And one of them told me, separate the person from the thing. And then you're non-judgmental and you can talk about that subject matter without being judgmental. And even though whether you believe in God or not, you can still believe in godly principles. Throughout my book, all things like that I openly talk about. And I want to give people a glimpse of God. It's not a Bible, as I'm trying to say. So very careful with things like humility, because if you say, I'm humble, you're not humble.
Right. Well, thank you so much. I think your gifting, your insight is really very incredible. We can go on and on because of time.
Yeah.
But you've said a lot of things that I believe our audience will really gain from. And definitely we'll put your LinkedIn link, into the description for people to see on the website also. Yes.
Website is where they'll learn the most.
Yeah, we will put the website also, put your LinkedIn, we put everything for people, especially if they want to connect with you. And on your website, they could be able to learn a lot of things that you already put out there. But I have to thank
Well,
you.
the book on the website as well.
Okay, great. Yes, the book can also be bought on the website. Yeah, but thank you so much for coming through and for sharing these. And I think we will stay connected. And we will be able to invite you again to come and share more of your experience. All right.
That would be great because the other book is completely different.
Okay.
All right. Thank you once again for
Thank you so much.
having me.
You didn't quit your day job to become a full-time admin assistant. The Intelligence Forge podcast is sponsored by Permasize AI Forge. At Permasize AI Forge, we know you didn't start your business to spend 60 hours a week on paperwork, chasing leads, and managing endless admin tasks. You started it to build something meaningful and serve your clients. But right now, you're trapped in the day-to-day grind instead of growing your business. What if I told you our clients are reclaiming 15, 20 hours per week, increasing their revenue by 30 to 50% within 6, 12 months, and finally getting their lives back? We don't just automate random tasks. We build custom AI systems that eliminate the bottlenecks choking your growth, from leads generation to lead, nurturing and management to project management to client follow-ups. Stop paying for an expensive, frustrating manual system. It's time to upgrade to strategic automation. Visit PermasizeAIForge.com and book your free business transformation strategy call today. Discover exactly how much time and money you're losing to manual processes and how to get both back. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the Intelligence Forge, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode packed with game-changing insights. Your future automated business is waiting.